without further ado, I am introducing Carl Skoggard.
Thank you, Claudia. Thank you. So, welcome everybody. This is a really big crowd here. I'm told that there are hundreds of people outside banging on the doors trying to get in.
Let me in. Right.
Right. So anyway, if anyone wants to give up their seat to one of those desperate people outside, you can think about it. So I'm simply going to read a little introduction that I cobbled together today about this novel, and it's a very peculiar novel. So, broadly speaking, Old Masters by Thomas Bernhard presents an anatomy of destructive art criticism. Art criticism generally, in fact, taking in all the arts. The central character of the novel is a Herr Reger, whose words you will be listening to shortly. An elderly Viennese gentleman of ample means, a childless widower, who files regular reports on Vienna's musical life to the Times of London, and has been doing so for decades. He is a professional music critic, but he seems even more engaged with painting, and in a quixotic quest that has him spending 3, 4, or 5 hours every second day in an art museum, the grand Kunsthistorisches Museum Wien. That's the Art Historical Museum of Vienna. And he's fixated on one particular painting, looking for what he calls a grave defect in it or on it, as he puts it. He's been doing this thing for over 30 years. All the other paintings in this world-renowned collection he has managed to dismiss as flawed. Only not Jacopo Tintoretto's Man with a White Beard, 1542. And eventually I'm going to show you a nice big picture of that on the screen. Trying to enter into the spirit of this strange novel, Bernhard's second to last and his only so-called comedy, I myself traveled to Vienna in May of this year, and I set myself the task of contemplating this same painting. I had a much younger friend wheel me around, since standing in place for too long I frankly find exhausting and therefore distracting. Herr Reger, for his part, has a special Sitzbank, I call it a settee, you might call it a sofa, in the Bordone room. This is basically a fictional name. Bernhard has named all the rooms in this museum after a particular artist. If you actually go there, you'll see that it's Roman numeral 16, Roman numeral 12, and so on. But for him, this is the Bordone room. And he has a special Sitzbank on which he sits while contemplating his Tintoretto. You will hear a lot about this settee, for it is where the action, or rather inaction, takes place during all 4 passages I intend to read to you. More than 30 years ago, Reger bribed a simple museum guard, a Herr Irrsigler, you'll be hearing his name, to make sure that this settee would always be available to him. Reger updates the bribe regularly. Irrsigler is one of the 3 other main characters in this novel, the rest of them being Herr Reger's wealthy wife, recently deceased, but much talked about, and Herr Atzbacher, a somewhat younger man, but not young at all, who has been writing a sort of philosophical work for decades without showing the work to anyone, while apparently drawing inspiration from his association with Herr Reger, whom in my translation he calls his thought director. That was a difficult thing to translate. Basically, it's a play on the very common word of Dr. Mutter or Dr. Vater. These are the men or women who help you through your dissertation. So he calls him a Gedankenvater, a thought father. So I say instead of a dissertation director, he's a thought director. We're meant to believe that Atzbacher is actually writing Bernhard's novel by recording what Reger says about anything Reger wishes to talk about, and interlarding this with some extensive reflections of his own. But we soon gather that what Atzbacher says on his own has only been imbibed from Reger, so it's just a vicious circle here. The epigraph, that's the the epigraph is the whatever is put right in front of the on page 1, right here. The epigraph for Old Masters is borrowed from the Danish Christian existentialist philosopher Kierkegaard. And I'm going to read it to you. The punishment fits the crime, to be robbed of all delight in life, to be brought to the highest pitch of world weariness. This is, in fact, the fate of the aging critic and aesthete Reger, who is engaged in his ongoing work of destruction. But then I would like to also read you the sentence that precedes what is used for the epigraph and the sentence that follows. And the whole thing comes from a passage in Kierkegaard's journal for the year 1855. It was through a crime that I came into the world. I came against God's will. The offense, which although it makes me in the eyes of God, a criminal in the eyes of God, sorry, mistake, is in a sense not mine. The offense is to give life. The punishment fits the crime, to be robbed of all delight in life, to be brought to the highest pitch of world weariness. Man would try his bungling hand at God's handiwork, if not to create man, then at least to give life. So this extended passage hints that Bernhard's own novel, Old Masters, is itself a criminal enterprise, because Bernhard actually identifies with Kierkegaard. And why is that? It's because Kierkegaard was born out of wedlock. That's what this is all about when he says, I came into the world against God's will. Kierkegaard was born out of wedlock, and Bernhard was too. Although an Austrian, his mother was working as a housemaid in the Netherlands, and she was, let's say, knocked up by this German carpenter who then abandoned the two of them and later committed suicide. So this fiction itself is, I identify with this, unwanted child. In Bernhard, as I mentioned, he actually tells you that the book is being written by Herr Atzbacher. And so therefore, it seems to me that Bernhard is like passing off the book, the writing of the book, onto the hapless Herr Atzbacher. The reason why this book is entitled Comedy is simple. Here, unlike what happens in nearly all other Bernhard novels, no major character kills himself or herself. That's a standard practice with him. In a purely technical sense, then, it is a comedy. But Herr Reger must suffer from not killing himself, from going on and on with his futile existence. The last laugh will be on him. That's a little bit by way of introduction. So, and I'm just going to read all these, I'm going to read all these 4 passages are Reger talking, and all of them happen in the Bordoni room with him sitting on the famous settee. And this is actually, I hope is funny. Actually, I've hated nothing more than museums ever since my childhood, he said. By my very nature, I am a museum hater, yet apparently this is exactly the reason I've been coming in here for more than 30 years. I can afford this no doubt psychologically determined absurdity. As you know, I don't go into the Bordoni room for Bordoni's sake, really not even for Tintoretto's sake, even though I do consider Man with a White Beard one of the greatest paintings ever painted. I go because of this settee in the Bordoni room, and because of the ideal influence of the light on my spiritual organs, actually because of the ideal temperature conditions prevailing just here in the Bordoni room, and because of Irrsigler, who is, after all, the ideal Irrsigler only in the Bordoni room. And honestly, I would never last in the vicinity of Velázquez, not to mention Rigaud or La Gillière, whom I avoid like the plague. Here in the Bordoni room, I have the best opportunities for meditation, and should I ever feel the desire to read something here on this settee, say my beloved Montaigne, or my perhaps still more beloved Pascal, or my even still more by far beloved Voltaire, As you see, all my beloved writers are Frenchmen. There's not a single German. I can do it here in the pleasantest and the most profitable fashion. The Bordone room is my thinking room and also my reading room. And should I ever feel the desire for a swallow of water, then Irrsigler brings me a glass. I don't have to so much as stand up. Sometimes people are amazed when they see me sitting on the settee, reading my Voltaire and drinking a glass of plain water with it. They marvel, they shake their heads and go on their way. And it's as if they took me for a lunatic with special state-issued court jester rights. For years now, I haven't read a single book at home. Here in the Bordone room, I've already read hundreds of books, but that doesn't mean I've read them, all of these hundreds of books in the Bordone room cover to cover. Never in my life have I ever read a single book cover to cover. My way of dealing is the way of a page riffler of first-class gifts, meaning of a man who would rather riffle through pages than read, meaning one who riffles through dozens or it may be hundreds of pages before he reads a single one. But then when that man does read the one page, he will read it more thoroughly than anybody else and with the greatest reading passion imaginable. I'm more riffler than reader, I'll have you know, and I love riffling every bit as much as reading. In my life, I've riffled millions of times more than read. I've always had at least as much joy and actual delight riffling as I have reading. When all is said and done, it's really better for us to read 3 pages of a 400-page book 1,000 times more thoroughly than the normal reader who reads everything but doesn't read a single page thoroughly, he said. It's better to read 12 lines of a book with the greatest intensity and so penetrate to the whole, as one may say, than it is for us to read the entire book like the normal reader, who in the end knows no more of the book he's read than an airplane passenger knows of the landscape he flies over. He doesn't so much as register the contours. It's how everyone reads everything today. In flight, they read everything and don't recognize anything. I step into a book and settle in it. I settle in on 1 or 2 pages of a philosophical work, holding back nothing of myself, you understand? It's as though I were in the act of stepping into a landscape, a bit of nature, a political order, or if you will, a detail of the earth, with the aim of utterly penetrating this detail of the earth, and not merely with half my strength and half my heart, and of investigating it so that, having investigated it with all the thoroughness at my command, I may draw my conclusions about the whole. Whoever reads everything hasn't understood anything, he said. So that's this very self-important person, you know. I don't know if anyone has any reaction to that.
Well, I do.
Tell me.
Well, it sounds like he's in his man cave.
Yeah, he's right. He's in the middle of this big room, which I'll also show you a picture of that. You know, being ministered to by this museum attendant that he's bribed, and he actually bribes time and time again, you know. Meanwhile, he's lecturing us all the time about how all these painters that he's been, you know, putting down have all been bribed, and you know they're all unethical and everything, you know. So now let's see, what do I got next for you? Okay, so now this is, Reger is talking about his childhood. And you might keep in mind what I read you about, you know, how Kierkegaard says that he came into the world, and it was a crime how he came into the world, and so on. And basically his parents committed the crime, really, right? And now Reger is going to riff on this in this reading I'm giving you now. And there's a lot more bullshit here. Ultimately, it was really music that made me come to life, he said yesterday. But naturally, I would not, and I could not, be a creative artist and not an executive artist either, he said. At any rate, not a creative or an executive musical artist, only a critical musical artist. I am a critical artist, he said. My entire life, I've been a critical artist. Already in my childhood, I was a critical artist, he said. The circumstances of my childhood made me into a critical artist in the most natural way. I feel myself to be an artist through and through, more precisely a critical artist. And as a critical artist, it's only natural that I'm also a creative artist. This is clear, which is to say, an executive and a creative critical artist, he said. And on top of that, a creative and executive critical artist for the Times, he said. I absolutely view my brief reports for the Times as works of art. And as the author of these works of art, I always think of myself as being simultaneously a painter and a musician and a writer all in one. This is my highest satisfaction, knowing that as an author of these works of art for the Times, I'm a painter and a musician and a writer all in one. This is my chief satisfaction. And therefore, I'm not like the painters, a mere painter. And I'm not like the musicians, a mere musician. And I'm not like the writers, a mere writer. I'll have you know I'm a painter and a musician and a writer all in one. I really experience this as the greatest happiness, he said, being an artist in all the arts and still being an artist in one. Possibly, he said, the critical artist is he who pursues his one and only art in all the arts and knows it utterly. Knowing it, I am happy. And to that extent, I've been happy for over 30 years, he said, even though I am an unhappy person by nature. The thinking person is by nature an unhappy person, he said yesterday. But even this unhappy person can be happy, he said, happy over and over in the truest sense of both the word and the idea as a pastime. Childhood is the dark hole down into which one has been shoved by the parents and which one must get out of again without any help. Most human beings do not manage to get out of this hole again, the childhood hole. They're in this hole for life and do not get out of it and are bitter. This is why most human beings are bitter, the ones who don't get out of their childhood holes. Nothing less than a superhuman effort is needed to get out of this childhood hole. And when we don't get out of the childhood hole soon enough from this darkest of all holes, we never get out of it, he said. For me to get out of this dark childhood hole, my parents had to be dead, he said. For me to get out of this childhood hole, don't you see, they had to be definitively dead, really dead once and for all. My parents would really have liked to stick me in their safe along with their jewelry and their stock certificates as soon as I was born, he said. I had bitter parents, he said, who suffered their whole lives from their embitterments. In all the photographs of my parents, whenever I look at them, I always see their embitterment. There are almost no children except those of embittered parents. That's why all parents look so bitter. Bitterness and disappointment mark all these faces. You'll scarcely find a different face. For example, you can walk through Vienna for hours and see only bitterness and disappointment in all these faces. And it's no different in the countryside. The country faces are also full of bitterness and disappointment. My parents made me, and when they saw what they had made, they were shocked and would have liked to unmake me. And since they couldn't stick me in their safe, they shoved me into the dark childhood hole, which I did not get out of for as long as they were alive. Parents always make their children irresponsibly, and when they see what they've made, they're shocked. That's why whenever children are born, we really see only shocked parents. Making a child and giving the gift of life, as it's so hypocritically called, is really nothing else than giving birth to a grave misfortune and placing it in the world. And then they're all shocked over this grave misfortune, time and time again. Nature has been making fools out of parents forever, he said, and out of these fools, unhappy children in dark childhood holes. People feel no embarrassment in saying they've had a happy childhood, whereas actually they've had an unhappy one from which they escaped with only the uttermost effort, and this is the reason they say they've had a happy childhood, because they've escaped from the childhood hell. Escaping from childhood means nothing more or less than escaping from hell. And then so-and-so says he had a happy childhood, sparing his makers, the parents, who shouldn't be spared, he said. Saying you've had a happy childhood, and thereby sparing your parents, is really nothing short of a socio-political disgrace, he said. We spare the parents instead of accusing them for as long as we live of the crime of human being making, he said yesterday. I was locked up by my parents in the childhood hole for 35 years, he said. For 35 years, they suppressed me with all the means at their disposal and tortured me with their dreadful tactics. I needn't have the slightest respect for my parents. They don't deserve the slightest respect, he said. They committed 2 crimes against me, 2 grave crimes. They made me and they suppressed me. Without my leave, they made me. And having made me and plopped me into the world, they suppressed me. They committed the creation crime against me and the suppression crime. And they shoved me into the dark childhood hole with the greatest possible parental ruthlessness. So I was told by somebody that, well, they said 40. They said after 40, you can't blame your parents for anything. I don't know what that says about me. But an uncle told me that, which I remembered. I remembered the advice. So you see the slight connection there with the epigraph, no? Child making is a very questionable business. So maybe we should look at some, Theo, maybe we should look at those few slides, Yeah, okay. And you see, Trenton Dirksen, who, it's a very interesting thing. He came up with a way to illustrate this book, which cannot be illustrated, but he figured out how to do it. And the first thing we have here is Reger's settee on the cover. And let me see the next. What's the next one? Okay, this is you see this. This is the inside the Kunsthistorisches Museum. If you look, you can see it's down a rather long descending staircase. And the person who designed the book itself Tom Beckham took elements from this mosaic and put it on the book cover. So there you see that. And then I don't have anything else. But anyway, other elements are on the spine and on the title page. Yeah. And then it's interesting what Trenton did. He since this cannot be illustrated, it's a very unvisual book, even though the whole thing is about a man looking at a painting, for all these decades. It's unvisual. Nothing is ever described in visual terms, really. But so Trenton he drew Reger's settee empty, without him sitting in it. And that's the first thing you see in the book. There's no explanation for what this is. It's just there, the empty settee. And then, okay, so you have to wonder what that is for a very long time. And then finally, after the book is over and you've read it, the other shoe drops. And there's what he's looking at. This is the Tintoretto painting, a very nicely rendered, Tintoretto painting. And that's how that works. So, what else do we have? Oh, this I wanted to show. This is my guru. This is my the person I go to in Berlin to get advice and encouragement for translating Sissy Tax, S-I-S-S-I-T-A-X. And she is a writer herself, and a very inventive writer, and is very patient with me and helps me. And I bring her that red lipstick from New York, because she loves Hollywood movies, and she loves all these 40s Hollywood women stars and whatever. So I always bring her the lipstick. So that's Sissy. What else do we have to show here? Oh, this is me. Because I went there. I went to Vienna in May, and I'm looking at the man with the white beard, and trying to feel the whole thing, because I find it a strange book, to be perfectly frank with you. And I had a young friend wheel me around the museum. I didn't have to do this myself. I was wheeled, and so that I didn't get tired standing around on my feet for 2 or 3 hours. And what else do I have? Oh, there it is, close up. He's looking askance, and my theory about that is that he's looking at Herr Reger, who's looking at him, and he's telling him he's full of shit, basically, is how I look at it. Oh yes, and this is just, this picture doesn't convey the size of this room. This is like halfway down the long side of the room, but you know, it's a nice, comfy Viennese sort of affair where you can sit and not be uncomfortable. But in the book, there's only one settee. Everybody's fighting to get on the settee, and he's trying to keep people off the settee. But it's not actually like this in reality. And yeah, okay. So that's just a little interlude for you. So now, Reger's wife, at the time of this novel, has recently died. And he's been in this sort of codependent relationship with this woman for like 40 years. And now I'm going to describe he's going to tell you how he met her, the circumstances under which he met her. So, after the death of my parents, it was a matter of course for me to return to Vienna, to this gray, war-depressed, vacuous city, where at first I existed for only several years in a state of sheer horror, he said. But just when I didn't know where to turn, I met my wife. My wife saved me. He's always feared the female sex, he says, and in fact hated women, so to speak, body and soul, and still his wife saved him. And do you know where I met my wife, he said. Did I ever tell you that, he said, and I thought. He's already told me that many times, but I did not say it, and he said, I met my wife in the Kunsthistorisches Museum. And do you know where in the Kunsthistorisches Museum, he asked. And I thought, naturally, I know where in the Kunsthistorisches Museum. And he said, here, in the Bordoni room, on this settee. The way he said this, it was as though he truly no longer remembered. He had already told me this hundreds of times, that he met his wife on the Bordoni room settee. And after he had said it once again, I acted as though I had never heard it from him before. It was a gloomy day, he said. I was in despair. At the time, I was very intensely engaged with Schopenhauer, having lost my appetite for Descartes, for French thinkers generally, and I was sitting here on this settee and meditating on a certain Schopenhauerian sentence. I can no longer say on which sentence, he said. Then, suddenly, a stubborn woman sat down next to me on the settee and did not get up again. I had given Irrsigler a signal, but at first Irrsigler did not understand what my signal meant, and then he wasn't able either to get the woman who was sitting next to me to get up again and leave. The woman sat there and stared at man with a white beard, Reger said, and I think she must have stared at man with a white beard for an hour. So, do you really like Man with a White Beard by Tintoretto all that much? I asked she who sat next to me, Reger said, and at first I received no answer to my question. Only after a rather long time did the woman say, no, a no, such as I had never heard before. This no, for me actually a fascinating no, Reger said. So, you don't care at all for Man with a White Beard by Tintoretto? I asked the woman. No, I don't care for it, the woman answered me. There ensued, as they say, a discussion about art, specifically painting, about the old masters, Reger said, a discussion that I suddenly hoped would go on for a long time. During the entire discussion, I took no interest in its content, rather in how it had been conducted. Finally, after going back and forth in my mind for a long time, I proposed to the woman that we share a lunch in the Astoria, and she accepted, and not long after that we were married. Then it turned out that she was very well-to-do besides, that she owned several businesses in the Innere Stadt, that's the central district of Vienna, as well as apartment blocks in the Zingerstrasse and the Spiegelgasse, and even one on the Kohlmarkt, he said, in addition to everything else. Suddenly, I had an intelligent, well-to-do cosmopolitan for a wife, Reger said, who saved me with her intelligence and her fortune, for my wife did save me. I was, as they say, at rock bottom when I met my wife, he said. So you see, I owe more than a little to this Kunsthistorisches Museum, he said. And do you know, thus Reger, that Irrsigler also has his share in this marriage? Later it came out that in the Sebastiano room, Irrsigler had said to my wife, who had leaned against the wall there, suddenly completely exhausted, that she really ought to sit down on the settee in the Bordoni room. Irrsigler had led her out of the Sebastiano room into the Bordoni room. At his urging, she had sat down on the Bordoni room settee, Reger said. If Irrsigler hadn't led her into the Bordoni room, presumably I would never have met her, Reger said. The day I met my wife, she had been suffering a so-called crisis of conscience, running through the Innere Stadt for several hours and uncertain as to whether she should buy herself a coat at Brown & Co. or a suit at Knights & Co., torn between Brown & Co. and Knights & Co. In the end, she decided to buy neither a coat at Brown & Co. nor a suit at Knights & Co., and instead to pay a visit to the Kunsthistorisches Museum, in which she had been only once in her life up to this point, in her early childhood, on the hand of her father, who had been a man of great artistic sensitivity. Naturally, Irrsigler is aware of his role as a matchmaker, Reger said. Suppose Irrsigler had led an entirely different woman into the Bordoni room, I often think, Reger said. An entirely different woman, Reger repeated. An English woman or a French woman, it doesn't bear thinking of, he said. Here we sit at our wits' end on this settee, Reger said, and are practically depression itself. Hopelessness, Reger mused. And a woman is sat down next to us, and we marry her and are saved. Millions of married people have met on a settee, Reger said. This circumstance is one of the most banal you'll ever find, and it's precisely to this banal trifle that I owe my existence, because if I hadn't met my wife, I would not have been able to go on existing. Today, this is clearer to me than ever. For years, I sat on this settee in more or less deepest despair, and suddenly I was saved. So, any reaction to that? No? I mean, he doesn't seem to have been, he seems to be like a feather blowing on the water, right? I mean, it just happened to him. He's a passive, he was a receiver of this experience. So, nobody.
But he wonders what would have happened if it hadn't happened.
Yes, I know. Right.
The thing that
They would have married that one too.
you think
Yes.
French or English?
Yeah, he would have married one of them, and that would have been a catastrophe.
It would have been.
Mm-hmm. So,
He seems to justify coincidence.
he certainly does. You're absolutely on the mark there, you know.
It develops it into his own idea.
Yeah. He rationalizes everything. Okay, so now the last little thing I'm going to read you is Herr Reger interacting with Herr Atzbacher. Now these first three things that I read to you happened before the present moment, and the way this whole novel is like a big shaggy dog story, because what you find out right at the beginning is that Herr Atzbacher is coming to the museum on this particular day, and it's an off day. It's a day he never meets Reger in the museum, because Reger has asked him to come, and then he's supposed to meet him at 11:30, but Atzbacher comes at 10:30, and he spies on him from an adjoining room, And then at precisely 11:30, when he's supposed to meet him, he pops out of the room, and then, Reger greets him as though it was the most natural thing in the world. He pulls out his watch, says it's 11:30, he looks up, there's Atzbacher. And then after that, we're left in suspense. It's no suspense at all, but I mean, Atzbacher is trying to leave us in suspense as to what Reger could mean by inviting Atzbacher on a day, Saturday, when he never invites him. So we find out, like in the last 2 pages of this 350-some page book, why he came, and it's a deflationary, it's a nothing burger, a reason. So, but what I'm going to read you it happens shortly after they meet up, so. Okay. Well, maybe I'll try to read this. Well, I got plenty of time, right? Okay. Okay. Good. Okay. Said, okay. Positively terrifying. No, wait. At precisely 11:30, he glanced at the watch he had taken, quick as a flash, from his jacket pocket. And in that same instant, I myself walked out of the Sebastiana room and into the Bordoni room and positioned myself in front of Reger. Positively terrifying, these Russian groups, Reger said. Positively terrifying. I hate these Russian groups, he said several times. He commanded me formally to sit down on the Bordoni room settee. Just have a seat next to me, he said. Every punctual human being makes me happy, he said. Most human beings are unpunctual. This is appalling. But then you were always punctual, he said. It's one of your great selling points. Ah, he said, following up, if you only knew what a bad night I had. I took twice as many tablets as usual and slept so badly. I was continually dreaming of my wife. I'll never put these nightmares where I dream of my wife behind me. And I thought about you, how you've come along in recent years. It's remarkable how you've come along, he said. Fundamentally, you lead a charmed life, an all but totally independent life. Admittedly, of course, there isn't an independent person on earth to begin with, let alone a totally independent one. If I didn't have the ambassador, he said, I would not survive the afternoons. Recently, so many Arabs come there that soon it will be an Arab hotel where it's really always been a Jewish hotel, Jews and Hungarians, Hungarian Jews most of all. That's what has made the hotel so agreeable to me for decades, he said. I don't even mind the Persian rug dealers who do their rug dealing in the ambassador. But don't you think, too, that it's gradually gotten dangerous to sit in the ambassador? Couldn't a bomb go off at any moment in the ambassador when you consider that the place is constantly full of Israeli Jews and Egyptian Arabs? My God, what does it matter if I get blown up, just so it happens in an instant? Mornings in the Kunsthistorisches Museum, afternoons in the ambassador, and eating well at midday in the Astoria or the Bristol, he said. That's what matters to me. Naturally, I couldn't lead any kind of life like this merely from the Times, he dissembled. The Times pretty much only forwards me my pocket money to Austria. But the stocks aren't doing well. The stock market is a catastrophe, and existing in Austria gets more costly by the day. On the other hand, I've worked it out that I could easily live on what I have for 2 more decades without any worries, provided no Third World War breaks out. This is reassuring, even with everything melting away day after day. You're the typical private scholar, Atzbacher, he said to me. I have to interrupt this for a moment. Private in this sense means not affiliated with an institution. That's what it means. You're the typical private scholar, Atzbacher, he said to me. Yes, you're the epitome of the private scholar. At any rate, you're the epitome of the private person. Altogether out of step with the times, Reger said. That's what I was thinking today as I toiled so laboriously up this dreadful staircase once more, up here to the Bordoni room settee, that you're the true and the typical private person, probably the only one I know, and I know so many persons who are all private persons, but you're the typical one, the true one. To think how you can stand to work for decades on a single study and not publish the tiniest bit of it. I couldn't do that. Once a month at least, I must experience the pleasure of having my work published, he said. This habit is an absolute necessity for me, and therefore I praise the Times for accommodating me in this habit on a regular basis, and even paying me for it. Indeed, he said, writing affords me distinct pleasure, these brief tours de force, each of which is no longer than 2 pages. That always makes 3.5 columns in the Times, he said. Have you never thought of publishing at least a small portion of your study, he asked, some fragment or other? Everything you say about your study makes it sound so first-rate. Though, on the other hand, it's always a delight not to publish anything at all, he said. Still, the day will come when you'll want to see the impact your study has, he said, and you'll publish at least a part of your study. On the one hand, it's magnificent to hold back a, so to speak, lifetime study for one's entire lifetime and not publish. But then, on the other hand, it's equally magnificent to publish. I'm the born publisher, whereas you are the born non-publisher. It seems that your study and you, meaning your study from out of you and you in relation to your study, by the way it's the saying, are condemned to non-publication. Condemned. For you must suffer constantly from the fact that you work at your study but don't publish this study. That's the truth of the matter, I think. It's only that you don't admit it, not even to yourself, that you suffer from this so-called non-publishing compulsion. I would suffer not publishing my literary work, although naturally your work isn't the same as mine. At any rate, I know of no writer, or at any rate, no writing person, who can stand not to publish what they've written for any length of time, who isn't curious what the public has to say about what they've written. I'm always burning with curiosity about it, Reger said, even though I always say I'm not burning with curiosity about it, that I'm not interested, that I'm not curious about what the public thinks. I'm burning with curiosity about it. Naturally, I lie when I say I'm not burning with curiosity about it, when really I'm burning with curiosity about it all the time. I confess I never stop burning with curiosity about it, he said. I want to know what people say about what I've written, he said. All the time, and from all of them, I want to know, whereas I'm continually saying that what people say about it doesn't interest me, it doesn't interest me. I say it doesn't interest me, that it leaves me cold. Still, the whole time, I'm burning with curiosity about it, and I look forward to nothing with more suspense, he said. I lie when I say that public opinion doesn't interest me, that my readers don't interest me. I lie when I say I have absolutely no desire to know what people think about what I've written, that I don't read what people write about it. There I'm lying. There I'm telling a truly vulgar lie, because I never stop burning with curiosity about what people say, about what I've written. I want to know all the time and any time, and I take to heart what people say about what I've written. It doesn't matter what they say. That's the truth of the matter. Naturally, I only hear what the Times people tell me, and they don't always confine themselves to what's flattering, Reger said. Now, where you're concerned, as a, so to speak, philosophizing writer, you would doubtless have just as burning an interest in what people say about your philosophical writings, what they think about them. I don't understand why you don't at least publish excerpts from what you've written, if only to ascertain what the public, what the, so to speak, expert public thinks about it, even if at the same time I say that no such expert opinion exists, has ever existed, or will ever exist. But doesn't it depress you to write and think, and to write what you've thought, and to write on, and all of it without the slightest echo, he said? Doubtless there's much you miss with your blind non-publishing, he said, and even perhaps what is crucial. You've been writing your study for decades now, and you say you're writing this study just for yourself. This is truly awful. No one writes a piece of writing just for themselves. It's a lie when someone says they're writing what they've written just for themselves. But then you know as well as I that there's no bigger liars than the people who write. From the very beginning of the world's never known bigger liars than the people who write. More conceited people and bigger liars, Reger said. And then I would just like to say that he circles around, and, this man is a captive audience, Atzbacher. So anyway, Reger circles around to a bunch of other topics, and then he just inserts this like 15 minutes later. He says, this is by the by, and yet you're neither a philosopher nor a writer. That's the interesting thing, and at the same time the truly unfortunate thing about and in you. for you're actually neither a philosopher, nor are you actually a writer. For a philosopher, you lack everything that distinguishes the philosopher, and for a writer, likewise, everything, although you really are precisely what I call the philosophical writer. Your philosophy is no real philosophy, and your writing, too, is no real writing, he repeated. And basically, a writer who doesn't publish anything is really no writer at all. So, that's them.
When was this written?
Then, late 1980s. Yeah. The late 1980s. That's why there's all sorts of stuff that relates to the time. This book is not written for the ages. I mean, it's written for an audience who was living through a certain thing. Thomas Bernhard has it in for Austria. He's like the court jester who can say any outrageous thing he wants about the country, and they just basically give him awards and basically kiss his ass, and then he goes ahead and does more and more. And that's the kind of pattern he had. And a lot of it is very localized, focus. You know what I mean? So it's not. And anyway, all the discussion of music and literature and everything that does come up in the book is all very, very focused. Reger is only interested in a certain kind of music, from Bach to whatever, Schoenberg, German and Austrian composers. And I should say that it interests me that many of his opinions are seductive, and I find myself agreeing with them, but he never sticks to an opinion. And basically, you never know if Reger is just this puppet that he's, using to express his own views, or if Reger is actually a bit different from Thomas Bernhard. You don't really know. I mean, that's how it works. So he can say any terrible thing he wants, and any stupid thing, and that's how it is,
What I find also really striking is how musical the language is, and is it that musical in German, or is it because
No, it's very it's remarkably it's rhythmic and formulaic.
it is?
Yes, it is. That's him.
But
Yeah.
it also reminded me of Gertrude Stein.
Mm-hmm.
So, the way the language is playing, not totally, of course, but the musicality and the playing.
And the repetitiveness of it makes you aware of it as language. I mean, there's this constant reiteration of everything,
Also, Samuel Beckett.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I was going to say also that it occurred to me recently that I make a point of the Kierkegaard being so important, and how the epigraph plays out in the book. But Schopenhauer himself is a very important character, and actually, in the end, he says basically, after his wife died, he was tempted. He thought it was his duty to commit suicide, because that's what he thought he was supposed to do, but he didn't do it because he was a coward and whatever else. But he was basically saved in that instance by reading Schopenhauer. And Schopenhauer, basically, as far as I could tell, instructs people to just stick with living to the end, because then you'll really know how terrible it can be. That's basically the advice he gets, and that's what this is what Reger does. Yes, this is what Reger does. But also, there's just a lot of identity here, because Schopenhauer never married, and Reger is a giant misogynist. Schopenhauer is an absolutely notorious misogynist who has spent his life berating his mother, who was also a writer. A fairly well-known writer at the time,
So that makes me wonder, is that...
And he was wealthy, just like this Reger. He didn't have to worry about anything. He inherited money, and he lived off it his whole life. So.
Is that why he's such an ass? Because he's suffering? Because he's, reaching towards the end of
He actually does suffer. That's the thing.
Well, yeah.
They're very extent. You read the book. They're
He
very
also judges
yeah.
everybody so
harsh.
really,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, he actually judges himself too. It's just like he's glib. I mean, he can say anything about himself, true things, but it's just glibness. It just kind of like, floats off him again, and he does suffer. Yes, there's a lot of the latter part of the book is him telling about all the harrowing experiences he went through, what he felt after his wife died, and an absurd funeral that he staged, and for her, and and then how he was tortured by this housekeeper who took advantage of him when he wouldn't even feed himself, so she fed him, and there's a whole long story about all his sufferings, right? Remember all that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And how the housekeeper cleaned him out, So, yeah. So, what else can one say?
There are a couple questions from the chat.
Yeah, who?
Logan Strosau.
He's a known quantity.
Yes. Two questions.
Yes.
Do you see Reger as a unique comedic character, or more like a symbol or almost allegorical representation of something, i.e. a class and generation of Austrians, or occasionally inclinations of the author himself? That's the first question.
Right. Well, I think he's sort of like he's almost like he's a gas bag. He's just like a performer who talks, and he is determined. He's class determined. I mean he's you can laugh at him. There are long passages where he talks about the good old days in one form or another, like when his mother, he used to go with his mother through the great park in Vienna, the Prater, and in a carriage, and his mother would run along with a little hoop along the main road in the park, and in an airy blue dress, blah blah blah. And he says nowadays you just, you have to expect to get stabbed in the heart if you go there, or at least have your wallet lifted, So he's sociologically determined and intellectually determined. I mean, he has a very specific wavelength about music and art. But basically, as I said on the back cover, the thing that makes people real is like they're erotic impulses and everything. And this book is distinguished by the fact that none of these three men have any, there's no hint of any sexual, interest on their part in anything. I mean, you can see that sex was not what got him married to his wife, right? That's pretty obvious. It just happened. And there's no indication at any other time that there was anything happening in that way. And the other two are it's just like talking heads. It's all it is. And so I don't think they don't seem like very real people to me, to answer his question. Real individual people.
And part two, he says, seems to me impotence, suffocation, lifelessness, and claustrophobia are currents running under the work. Nothing starts, but instead endlessly revolves in the same place, both physically and mentally. Humans, example his wife, his two henchmen, become mere mannequins to support its own emptiness.
Thoughts? Well, the whole thing is eerie because I didn't get into this because it's so hard to convey, but the center of the book is Herr Reger sitting on the settee, and then you have the guard Irrsigler who sort of floats in and out of these rooms, and every few minutes he comes in and looks at Herr Reger to see if he needs something. And then we hear all the time that Atzbacher comes to the museum when he needs to talk to his thought director, and when he can't wait until the afternoon because he would prefer to see him in ambassador. But anyway, these are all patterns that happen over and over and over again. And I had the image of that it's basically like a little solar system. Like I can read you the first paragraph that I wrote on this in this afterward, get a sense of it, what I was meaning. So, Thomas Bernhard's Alte Meisterkomödie, his next to last novel, presents us with an odd little solar system, a shrunken, purely Viennese cosmos whose heavenly bodies trace neat, codependent orbits. Or if not a cosmos, then a Viennese hothouse whose exotic growths are found nowhere else, or a stagnant pool, then, where one improbably large fish is mysteriously flourishing at the expense of all the rest. These Viennese settings, the august Kunsthistorisches Museum, the shabby chic hotel ambassador, a huge rambling Jugendstil apartment on the Zingerstrasse, are but ghosts of imperial grandeur in a city down on its luck and running on empty, itself a mere outpost of the Cold War, also running on empty. We are in the mid-1980s. So there's this whole, there is sort of like there's stasis. I mean, the motion is just these people in these orbits that go on and on doing the same thing all the time. So he's right about that. And yeah, I mean, there's a semblance of life when he starts suffering on account of his wife's death. There is some there, I would say. What else did he say there? I have to hear that a little bit. The second part.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Why is your translation better?
Than that other one? Well, I think it's. Yes, I think it is because the man who translated it was translating, not translating. He was not translating into his native language. He's not an native English speaker. He's a Czech, probably bilingual in German and Czech. And it's just that everything is a little bit, just the tiniest bit off the mark, just a little bit, like a little bit out of focus, the English, I mean, it's not bad. It's not, there's not, it's just, it's accurate. It's a reliable translation in that sense. This is, well, mine is the second.
No, but
Yes, that was the first. Yes, oh yes. And I noticed that I noticed.
Right, which is, yeah, they must have had enough English that I suppose.
Oh yes, a lot of English.
I understand that, but Yes.
It's hard to translate it.
translating in a language that's not your first language, it's a different. Yeah. That was my point. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like a little bit. I don't know. The rhythms aren't as sharp as I tried to make them, and the repetitions are not always exact, like which I tried to use exact repetitions. I mean, that's basically the reason. It's not a really bad translation. I wouldn't ever say that, and I learned certain things from reading it. So, yeah.
Well, there is a comment. I'm not sure. I'll just read it, I guess. I'm not sure if it's a question exactly. Matthew Stigler says,
Yes, Matthew. Yes.
every literary text proposes its own realism, a reality that the writer apprehends and which guides the book's composition like a beacon. No writer intentionally distorts, I believe. They write staying true to that work's reality. I'm curious for whom, in your view, Old Master's comedy rings true. Which readers feel the book's reality as their own?
That's good. Matthew is a very good friend of mine and a novelist, so he knows what he's talking about. See, my trouble is that Reger, and I'm sure it's Bernhard, actually berates people for being overly earnest, And I didn't actually get to the point of saying that there's all this insistence on every minute you're told when this speech that's being reported happened, and exactly when, and the relative dates of everything. And actually, none of that adds up to not at all. It's completely haywire, and I've suffered. I mean, in the very maybe second page of this book, this is an interesting question. Like, let me see. Well, anyway, I'm not going to find it, but he says Atzbacher is reporting that for the last Reger has been saying that Reger has been. I wish I could find it. Reger has been saying that he's. Let me see. Sorry. So the trouble is I'm not used to this one. For the last, he says that Reger has been saying for decades that he is whatever he's saying for the last 35 years. Reger has been saying for decades that Irrsigler is a state zombie, has been a state zombie for the last 35 years. So that is a complete nonsensical statement, and I was tortured by it. Did I make myself clear? He's saying that for decades now, Reger has been saying, Atzbacher reports, that Irrsigler is a state zombie in the Kunsthistorisches Museum. Has been for 35 years. So, to me, for a long time I said I was so tempted to change it, to do something, to just edit it and improve it. But in the end, I decided that this is a shock to the system that is being administered to you right at the beginning. And then all through the book, there's all kinds of, discrepancies, like all the time. So, and Matthew wants to know for whom is this the actual truth? Well, he's basically retailing a lot of his convictions about, his indignation about how bad Austria is, and that seems to be what he's driving at all the time. And gee, I don't know. I think it's just. I think the truth of this is. He also says that somewhere Reger says he says that I have this in my little translator note. So he says ultimately, I say nothing matters here apart from talk. So this is a book about talk. Everything else, plot, narrative, plausibility, incoherence, character, is dissolved in hundreds of pages of hyperbolic, run-on talk, which is at times hypnotically formulaic talk, at times just plain rant. And then Reger says, and at some point, sooner or later, everything that's said is all nonsense, but when we utter it with conviction, with all the vehemence we can muster, then it's hardly a crime. And I think that's at the heart of the book. So I guess it's someone who believes in that talk is that kind of changeable, mutable, unreliable, important thing that people live through. I mean, Reger lives through talk, by talk and through talk. So I guess, coming up with improvising an answer, I suppose I would say that's the person for whom it is, the real truth. So that's what I would say.
These all run-on sentences?
Yeah, well, it's one paragraph. It's 330 pages in this version. And no indenting.
No stops?
Yes, no, there are stops, but there are no. It just slides from one thing to the next without announcing that it's changing any point of view, and and then sometimes Atzbacher speaks up, and he's sort of like a cruder version of Reger, and then you realize eventually that he's imitating everything that, everything that Atzbacher says he's learned from Reger. And also true of the museum guard, who sometimes has opinions about art and so forth. Yeah. So yeah, it's just you just read it, it's hard to know when you try to pick out a nice episode that's rounded and has a beginning and an end, you're kind of falsifying the book, which of course I'm tempted to do that because, there are long, funny stretches. So, but it'd be just as true to the book to like read the end of something and the beginning of the next thing, or to just, like people used to open Virgil and to a passage and they would read it and that would be treated as a prophecy, and you could just as well open this book anywhere and read, and that would be, the truth of the book. So.
Any more questions out here in Hudson, New York?
No. Not from Professor Bordeaux.
Well, I actually think that it's written for artists, and because I think that ultimately it's Bernhard's voice.
Yeah.
That is all the voices, and that it's a take on modernism, on Joyce and on Gertrude Stein, and it's nasty and sarcastic and hilariously long, and it's for me it's very much of the 80s, which is a time of postmodernism and when things were great art or the canons under assault, and so he really goes to town on Austrian society, its provincialism, its nastiness, and I think it's hilariously funny.
Yeah, it is.
And the tragedy of it is that he's trapped. He's a pedant. He's a boring, pedantic voice.
The people who listen to him, they're trapped for sure.
Yeah, they get trapped, but they're all the same voice. And so it's also Bernhard's voice too, because in his other books, like The Loser, there's much more tragic consequences to the negativity. But in this book, it's almost like an opera. It's like an endless song to himself.
It is true. He lays hints. He lays suggestions all through that they're not really separate people. Like he mentions, for example, both of the Atzbacher and Reger at different times mentioned that they have pulmonary illnesses, which Bernhard had.
And I think it's fantastic. I think it's a really hilarious and very musical. And the repetitions in the book that I read, the translation, are Germanic. So I don't know whether your translation will give them more of a subtlety in the English language, but there's a heaviness in that translation which makes some of his repetitions even more leaden.
Mm-hmm. Right.
They fall pretty.
It's hard. I mean, this is certain of his things that he puts forth about realism in art, and are difficult to take, right, at any level.
Well,
Reger, yeah.
criticism. I mean, the thing is if you are an artist and you read criticism or you live in the cultural world of authorities, there's a tremendous amount of anger and resentment that gets built up, and in a sense, the book is a little bit like the writer's inner monologue, railing against himself, but also against all the authorities and all of the, all of the elaborate sort of, I would say, critical mechanisms in a provincial society that really close everybody down. So I see it as funny, but also critical and self-critical.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't actually even think about the characters as real,
Mm-hmm.
or needing any kind of narrative to keep my
Right.
interest in it is like a puppet show, and he's a fabulous ventriloquist, and his voice is really screeching at times, and overly sarcastic and nasty, and it's kind of amazing and funny, and also very, very.
See, I love reading it. I can sit with a drink and, read either Bernhard or this, secondary version of it, and I can savor it because of the, the rhythmic quality of it. Yeah. But I don't. That's not the same as thinking about it. I like reading it and going with it. And not so much thinking about it. I mean, that's the way I.
Similar to Michel Houellebecq, who's the most negative author alive right now. And, when you read him, it's like descending into evil. He's really quite dark, but he has a unique voice, and so does Bernhard. He has an incredibly specific writer's voice that is astounding to you. I've always, and I can just read it. I don't really have to think about it. Yeah. In relation to the narrative or the fiction.
Speaking of evil, there's a very strange. He talks about Reger talks about how he spent the war years. He's a wealthy Austrian. He spent the war years in London, but then he comes right back after it. His parents lived the whole time in Vienna, and you just don't know. You don't know how he fits into this, larger. There's no attempt to actually fit him into the larger historical picture, but there is that evil there, that he's sort of not coming to grips with, right? I mean, in this book, there's no.
Austria is a really, I mean, I know a number of Austrian artists, and it's a deeply conservative Catholic state that really embraced Nazism. I mean,
it's like he says.
That kind of depth of despair that's also in his voice about being an Austrian, but he doesn't want to write critically about it. He has to lampoon it and make it into a comic opera thing. I don't know. I think it's kind of. I'd love to hear it performed. We like going to.
There has been one. There has been one.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there's been an adaptation, and it was, of course, done in the Kunsthistorisches Museum, and
It would be like going to like a 10-hour Philip Glass performance.
Yeah.
Depending on who read it. It could be really great.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I have nothing more.
Nothing more to say?
Nope.
Question if there's time, but I don't know. We are, one more?
Linda said we could stay here till midnight,
Cows.
till the cows come home.
I think it's 7 o'clock on the calendar.
Okay.
You're already in bed.
This is from Peter Nowogrodzki.
Another character.
Do you think there's any particular reason it's Tintoretto or the man with a white beard or Bordone, or are these just arbitrary choices?
Well, I thought that. Hi, Peter. I thought that that it seemed the man suggests himself as an alter ego to Reger. Basically, and he's skeptical. He looks very skeptical. And that's Reger is busy trying to demolish the Tintoretto, and the Tintoretto is looking right back at him and doubting what he's doing, basically. And he's not a. They don't know who he is. He's not a known person. It's probably significant. And he's a well-situated, wealthy. You can tell from his costume that he's a Venetian office holder, probably from 1542 or so.
I think it's the only painting that he can't find fault with.
That's correct.
So it's a mirror.
That's why he's sitting there the whole time. Yes, right. That's correct.
And on that note,
Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Thank you for coming. I appreciate your coming here.